Hello there, Gus here, and we're going to be having some theological thoughts. Before we do anything else, hit the subscribe button, then you know when I've got new things. Today, I want to talk about the impossible fiction. And Philip Yancey writes in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, he says, if Jesus had never lived, we would not have been able to invent him. Now, let's pause for a moment and think about that, because although it is a nice sentence Yancey wrote there, it touches on something very deep, because Yancey is essentially saying that Christ is so unique, nobody or people, no matter how creative, could have invented him. Now, I want to look today and see, is that true? And to do that, we need to see what made up Jesus Christ. And I'm going to start with a little text in Hebrews 1 verse 6, and it reads, "And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him." Now that is an interesting thing for God to say, is it not? Why does God have to tell the angels to worship Christ? I'm going to give you three reasons. The first being, it recognizes Christ's divinity. Christ was God. He became man, but in that incarnation process, he made his divine attributes latent, but he did not lose them. He did not water down his divinity. And this recognizes that despite the incarnation, Christ has retained his essential divine nature. Second reason, it's a confirmation of Christ's divine victory. The victory on the cross, salvation itself, could only have been achieved by one who is divine. No being less than God could have done it. And thirdly, Christ became man. He emptied himself, to borrow a biblical word, of divine attributes. He was as a man in every conceivable way. But at the same time, the way he behaved, what he revealed to us, is evidence that he is God. Now, let's go to Hebrews 1 verse 8. But of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. In that passage, Christ is clearly called God. So the fact that the Father says you shall worship him, and the fact that Christ is called God, they affirm one another. But let's go to Hebrews 1 verse 9, where we read something very peculiar. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Why does it say God, your God? Now, it's very simple. Let's backtrack. Firstly, Christ is God. The fact that he's worshipped, the fact that he's called God, attest to this. And as we've said, without losing his divinity, he willingly subjected himself to God the Father. He stood in the same relationship as you and I should stand to God the Father. And therefore Christ, as God, willingly subjected himself to God the Father in the role of a man. Now, if you go back in the Old Testament, this is a quote from Psalm 45 verse 6 and 7. And the writer of Hebrews is actually saying, I'm not making this up. It's been with us for thousands of years. We've read this. All I'm doing is saying, when I look at Christ, I see the application, and new depth comes from the passages we know so well. Now, where the first chapter of Hebrews deals with Christ's divinity, the second chapter deals with his humanity. And I'm going to Hebrews 2 verse 6 to 9, and it reads, it has been testified somewhere. What is man that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Now, the writer of Hebrews is being very careful. He says, we didn't immediately see Christ's divinity. Christ did not come and display divinity. He did not come and display power. What Christ came is, he displayed the heart of God. And the writer is once again quoting Psalm 8 verse 4 to 6, saying, this humiliated state of Jesus was a temporary state. This is not the constant reality. It's a willing, temporary state that Jesus entered to in order to effect salvation for us. Now let's read Hebrews 2 verse 14. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. Now when it comes to the humanity of Christ, it's two big theological views. One says Christ had a sinful human nature. The other says Christ had a sinless human nature. Now, instead of jumping back and forth between theological opinions, I'm going to do a simple thing. I'm going to go to the Bible and see what evidence is there and where does it direct us. We follow the path of truth and we should end at truth. Let's first look at human nature, and I'm reading here from Genesis 8 verse 21. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. And Psalm 51 verse 5 reads, Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Now, you will say to me, but this is unfair. What about a baby? What has a baby done wrong? How can a baby be conceived as sinful? Well, Paul gives the answer here in Romans 5 verse 12, and he says, Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. You see, when Adam sinned, we lost something. Now, we did not inherit Adam's specific sin. We're not guilty of eating the fruit as Adam did. What we inherited was a broken relationship with God. When we are born, we are little rebels waving our fists at God. We don't know God by nature. Now, when we turn to the birth of Jesus, we find something very interesting. And the angel answered her, The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. And that is from Luke 1 verse 35. Now for the Adventists listening, Ellen White, in The Entire Desire of Ages, partially quotes this passage once and makes a reference to it another time. The rest of the time she avoids it. There's one instance where I did find she make mention of this specific verse, and this is in the infamous Baker letter. Now the preceding paragraph reads as follows. These words do not refer to any human being except to the Son of the infinite God. Never, in any way, leave the slightest impression upon human minds that a taint of or inclination to corruption rested upon Christ, or that he in any way yielded to corruption. And then in the very next paragraph, she writes, his birth was a miracle of God. Now what this means is that Mary was to be the mother to Jesus. She would give birth to him. She would feed him. She would care for him. But she had no genetic connection to Jesus to give her any kind of advantage. And therefore Christ could not have inherited a sinful human nature from Mary. Now, I read earlier in Hebrews 2 verse 14 that Christ was made like us in flesh and blood. But why was Christ not made like us in heart? Isaiah 14 verse 13 reads, You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. And Jeremiah 17 verse 9 reads, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? This is why Christ did not have a heart like humans have a heart. Human beings are made up of relationships. And when we look at ourselves, our relationship to God is a broken relationship. We do not by nature know God or want to know Him or care for Him. The most natural thing for a human being is to ignore God or to create a God that suits his needs. And because we have this broken relationship to God, our relationship to ourselves is sinful, our relationship to others is sinful, and our relationship to the world is sinful. When we turn to Christ, we find a different picture. Christ in his relationship to God was sinless, perfect. But in every other way, Christ shared our sinful human existence. Because Christ had this perfect, sinless relationship to the Father, he could be our substitute. He could be the sinless one to die for the sins of the world. But at the same time, because he lived in our sinful human condition, he can be an example for us when we are faced with temptation. So if I have to sum this up, when it came to the relationship of God to the God-man, that was a perfect sinless relationship. But the God-man to the God-man, the God-man to mankind, the God-man to the world, all experienced a relationship affected by sin. Now, when we look at the death of Christ, we have two interesting passages here. The one says in Acts 2 verse 31, he foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. And Hebrews 2 verse 18, for because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. So what does this mean? In death, Christ entered death sinless, with a perfect relationship to God the Father, which means he had full connection to life. Because he was sinless, death could not hold on to Christ. It is in this purity, the sinless purity, that Christ experienced the full weight of sin. And when I say the full weight, it includes the grossness, the suffering, the inevitable separation from God. And that is why no one can say to Christ, you don't understand. Christ experienced all the suffering, all the pain, all the evil of sin. When on the cross, he felt all our pain. And this is the conclusion now. Christ is God who became man. He is to be worshipped. He was free from sin to die for our sins, but he was also affected by sin to strengthen and comfort us. And I can see why Philip Yancey calls Jesus that he couldn't be invented. That's why I call him the impossible fiction. And if it's an impossible fiction, it can only be an ultimate truth. There's paradoxes in each human being. But these extreme paradoxes, to place them into one person, is not the thinking of a human mind, no matter how creative. Christ stands unique. He is a vexing, perplexing being. But that is because he is the impossible fiction. And the impossible fiction can only be the ultimate truth.